Yo, so this is part two of my three-part devlog update. Um, and my first video was all about the changes I've made to procedural generation with marching cubes and all that stuff. This one is going to be talking about the player and the ship. Okay, so I guess as a precursor, in the earlier versions of Planet Hopper, all I had were some spheres floating around in space, right? And that was just to get all the physics working for, you know, gravity and things like that. Um, and when I was working in a sphere-only environment, there were some shortcuts, or I guess privileges I could use on the player and the ship. And so, for example, to start with the ship, uh, previously I would always rotate the ship so that its up vector was the same vector as the vector between the center of the planet and where the ship currently was. So it's always facing straight up, right? But now I don't have spheres, so that doesn't work. And I changed the ship so that instead it uses the up vector of the the mesh vertexes that it's colliding with. More specifically, I'm doing a sphere cast that I use for a grounded check, right? And I just use the resulting data of that sphere cast to grab the mesh and be like, okay, what is your up vector? And in this case, right, the up vector is this vector here, and the ship rotates, and so it is facing the right way. But I haven't talked much about the ship, so I'll let you in on a little secret. I can collide with the ship, which, I mean, that's not much of a secret on its own. But I collide with the mesh, as you'd expect. I can jump on top of it and all this stuff. But that collider is a lie. Woo. And the reason I say that is because that collider's only being used for player-ship collision, right? I actually have another collider, which I can open up in here. And this body collider here is just a sphere. Just a sphere. Oh, that's strange. Why would I do that? Well, let me give you an example. So if I were to grab the ship and move it up, and let's say it turtles itself, right? And let's just go back to the game. Oh, it lands, and it rotates to face the right way up. And you can even see here, I'll do it again in case you missed it. Some parts of the ship model actually clip through the ground, like the legs. Uh, and so the reason I did that was because I didn't want the ship to get stuck on the ground when it was moving around. And also, all the physics calculations just work a lot smoother if I assume that the ship is a sphere. I mean, most of the calculations just assume that the ship is a point in space, but the sphere just makes it a little bit more, a bit easier, right? And it also makes the ground checks easier too. And it's a convincing enough effect. It doesn't make sense to use the mesh collider for all that stuff, and I think it worked out great. I think it was a good creative solution. Okay, cool. So I think that's about it with the ship. In the previous video, I talked about how I was painting everything now, right, on the planet. And I said that green meant ground, and I said that brown meant wall. So here, let me move my camera over to my lovely player. And just to demonstrate that now, I have linked up the player grounded state with the colors of the planet. So if I walk over just a little bit more, you can see I'm in this dead zone, and when I turn red, that means I am now considered to be um, in the air when I'm red. I'm green when I'm on the ground. Red, I'm considered in the air. And so when I'm walking up here, I'm considered in the air. I know I'm still moving up over there on the left, but the movement actually works a little bit differently. So as I have upward velocity, I can move up the slope. But I'm holding W right now, and nothing's happening, right? And that's because I'm just trying to move straight into the wall. Which brings up a good point because I actually had to change some stuff about the player too. The player doesn't have that ship rotation thing, right? Where the ship always rotates so it's facing up from the mesh, the vertices in the mesh that it's colliding with. But the player, on the other hand, doesn't. However, when the player's moving around, their movement is relative to the mesh. So when I hold W, you can see this vector I draw out here, that that blue vector. I guess I can't really point at my screen now. That blue vector and the red one as well, right? The red is my target velocity, and the blue is my current velocity. Um, the blue vector is facing a little bit down, and now it's facing a little bit up, and that's because it's all relative to the vertices on the mesh. And the reason I did this was because before, when I held W, I would just use the forward vector of my player. So if I were to hold W right now in the old version, I would just move forward and like levitate for a little bit and then fall back down. And so it would cause the player to like keep switching back and forth between grounded and in the air, and it was jittery and it wasn't good, right? And so I made all of the movement relative to the ground. Okay. And then let's see. Another thing I did was I changed how the player works out of orbit. So right now I am in orbit of a planet. If I am green or red, I am in orbit. If I'm blue, that means I'm out of orbit. So if I just jump in my ship real quick, just make a beautiful flight above my big sphere, you'll see my ship changes from red to blue. And now I am considered to be out of orbit. Okay, cool. And here I can even show you if I jump out of my ship, and let me pause it real quick. And I should be able to just zero out my velocity, maybe. You know what, actually, I'm going to go into my player test scene. So this scene just has a player in it, and there's no planets here, so we're out of orbit. And as a result, we stay red. Whatever, the debug doesn't work the same in this special scene. But as I move around, that that thing I was talking about before about a relative up, well, it doesn't work the same way when I'm out in space. So if I look down, right, my camera reaches its maximum value, and normally when I look straight down, my camera stops. But when I'm out of orbit, my player model starts rotating. And so I have full 360-degree rotation, right? And you'll notice there's this little threshold before my player actually starts rotating. That yellow vector there, here, let me get a closer look. That yellow vector is the forward vector of the camera, and the green vector is the forward vector of the player itself, like the actual model, right? And specifically, the thing that I changed, well, I did add all that, the camera threshold and stuff. Before, when you were out of orbit, you would just always rotate your full player model. And the reason I added in that threshold, let me get back into this scene, was because the transition between in orbit and out of orbit was a bit messy. I had to like reset the camera so it was the same as the forward vector of the player because you were moving around in space, and it was like this really rigid transition, super snappy, like not snappy in a good way, like snappy in a, oh, what just happened? I don't understand. Why is my camera in a totally different direction now? So because I separated out the camera logic a bit with that threshold, it basically let me jump out of my ship. So I'm in that free fall mode where I can just like look wherever I want. And then as I get into the planet's gravity, so I'm just boosting towards it. Bum, 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 bum. Let's see, you'll see. There we go. We got a nice little movement back. And you can see now my camera's constrained to straight down and straight up. Right. So yeah, there was lots of other little things I had to fix along the way. Like I added this nice little this ship HUD element because people were losing their ships all the time. And to be honest, I should have had this in a long time ago. But it's in now, so it's okay. And when you're off screen, it just points you back towards where your ship is. But yeah, I think that's it for this update. So I guess in the next part, this is part 2, I will be talking about the solar system itself because it's gone through lots of iteration, and it will continue to go through iteration as I decide what works best. All right, well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.